So the next process I want to talk about inside of ZBrush for building up shape and form is a process called Create Difference Mesh. So to start off here, I just have the scan data of Paul's head here loaded in. This was the STL that we loaded in for the base mesh generation. I also have the visual reference loaded of the helmets here for the concept. That was loaded through Spotlight. Now I've gone through already and pre-processed this scan data here to generate a base mesh out of it. So if I come over here to my subtool palette, you'll see I have the raw scan data on top, and then if I select underneath it, I have a mesh that's been processed. So I took the scan data, did a mirror and weld. I also went through and re-dynameshed that object, so I have a nice even distribution of polygons across the entire surface. And I've gone through and scrubbed out the details that Paul had on his face. So if I turn to the side here and then turn on transparency and turn off ghost, and then come over here and turn on the scan data, you can see that I've basically created a shell that fully engulfs Paul's head. So since this helmet will be printed out into a tangible form, I want to make sure that I have a cavity that Paul's head will fit into when the helmet is done. So I've just generated it around the actual surface, and this is basically creating that inner area of the helmet so that Paul's head, after the helmet is done, will fit inside correctly. So to get this mesh ready for using this Create Difference Mesh, the first thing I want to do is just kind of clean up this bottom part here. So right now I have the helmet, it's kind of extending past the neck and down to the shoulders, and the actual helmet itself kind of stops right at that jawline. So I want to come in and just trim this off really quick. So to do this quick, I just want to come and grab the Select Lasso brush. So I'm going to hit B on my keyboard, isolate by the letter S, and locate Select Lasso. You'll get a little dialog that'll pop up and just telling you it's the active selection brush now, so you just hit OK. And now if you hold Control and Shift on your keyboard, you should see the Select Lasso brush is now the brush that is loaded. So now holding Control and Shift, you can just kind of drag a lasso across your model here and just kind of isolate that bottom section. Once you have that fully engulfed, just hold down Alt and it'll turn it red, and then when you release, it's going to hide that portion of your model. So now with that portion of my model hidden, I'm going to come back over here to the Geometry tab and go to Modify Topology and do a Delete Hidden, which is going to delete that part that we just made invisible, and then do a Close Holes, and that's going to seal that up nice and neatly for us. Now since that close holes came through, you may end up with topology you can't really sculpt on, so it's just kind of sealing it up. It's not really trying to give you even topology across the surface. So I'm going to go back over to the Geometry tab, go to that Dynamesh tab, make sure it's active, and then just hold Control and click off, and it's going to re-Dynamesh that mesh. So it's just going to go through and redistribute those polygons across the entire model in an even fashion. So now I come through and just kind of smooth this base out here, and I have that helmet kind of establishing just the core size in relation to the reference. So I'm going to come over here and turn on the actual scan data, so now I can see them both together, and now we can start talking about the Create Difference Mesh option. So the Create Difference Mesh lives all the way down here underneath the tool palette in the actual Morph Target subpalette. And here when you open this up initially, you're going to see there's just a Store Morph Target button, and then everything else is grayed out. The actual Create Difference Mesh lives right here, and it's actually grayed out until you actually store a Morph Target on your object. So the principle, the main idea behind the Create Difference Mesh is that first you have your object, so we have this helmet interior shape here. We're going to store a morph target on that, and then you're going to come through and just sculpt on your model. So you can just do traditional sculpting. You can also come through and do things like masking, inverting it, and then using your transposed lines to kind of deform that surface. So just anything that you can do in ZBrush that involves just manipulating the surface of the actual model. So after you have this done, the next step is you come over here and you just hit this Create Difference Mesh button. And when you click this, it's going to take the offset from the original stored morph target to the actual change you made in the mesh. And it's going to generate a new tool up here at the top. So if I come up here to the top of the tool palette, you'll see I have a new tool called Morph Diff. And if I click on that, you'll see it actually generated geometry based on the offset from the stored morph target to the geometry that was sculpted on the model. So this is a very quick way to come through and just sculpt on your model using a morph target and then create new topology for it. So if I go back to my helmet here, I'm just going to undo this, just clear those guys back off. I'm going to delete that morph target and just store it again. And then I'm going to come through and just start sculpting some of these forms out. So I'm going to go grab the clay buildup brush, and I'm just going to come through and sculpt, this kind of area in here on the model. I'm just building up the shape with just clay buildup. So nothing fancy, just sculpting, pushing and pulling the actual vertices of the model here to kind of get that form to be flushed out a little more, like so. Now when you're using the actual create difference on this, you can also go negative like so into your model, but since I have this kind of cavity already set up and knowing that Paul's head will fit inside that, I'm going to refrain from actually going negative on my model. So I'm just adding form to it and not doing any negative sculpting on the model, because I want to be able to have this helmet to fit Paul's head when it's completed. So I'm just going through and just sculpting some of these details out, nothing fancy at all. Another brush that's really good for doing this kind of create difference mesh brush is actually the layer brush. So if I hit B on my keyboard and isolate by the letter L, I'm going to locate the layer brush right here. Now this brush, when you drag it on your model, it's going to give you a layer height based on your intensity. So right now you can kind of come through and start sculpting on your model, and it's going to give you this constant kind of height based on that intensity value on the top. Now one thing to look out for when you're actually using this is make sure you're giving enough thickness on your actual intensity when you do this, because we're going to turn it into a mesh, and if you have really thin areas of geometry on your newly generated mesh from that create difference brush, you could end up with some issues when you're actually trying to sculpt on that piece later. So I usually come and crank this intensity up quite a bit and then come through just to kind of give it enough thickness across there, and then you can just kind of sculpt these kind of variables out. So that might actually still be a little too thin. Let me up it all the way to 100, and that will be a little better there, a little on the safer side as you come through and start establishing forms like this as well. So I'm just going to go through and sculpt some of these other forms out. So just clay build up again and just sculpt more of this kind of top part out here. I'm just going with a really wide brush, just pulling some of those forms out that are on that reference. And just smooth in a little bit just to get that shape generated out. So clay buildup, it's a great brush for this. Also the masking is another great way to do this. So I can mask this area out here, invert that mask, and then just go into the move brush by hitting B on my keyboard, isolating by the letter M, just finding move, and then I can just take a larger brush size of that and start pulling some additional shapes out. So very quick kind of sculpting stuff. And then after you have your kind of panels and everything kind of sorted out the way you want them, just clear your mask and then come over here and just click that create difference mesh button there. Now if we go up to the top, you'll see I have this nice mesh that's been generated from that actual morph target. So then I go back to the scan of Paul here and just select that, so I just see Paul's head, and I can just append that morph difference new tool right in, and so you can see now I have the head with that kind of geometry on it. I can now go to that geometry and use my smooth brush, make sure you turn symmetry on, and kind of clean up some of these areas here. I'm also going to convert it to a Dynamesh, because right now my topology is just kind of like all over the place. So I'm going to come back to the Geometry tab, go to the Dynamesh subpalette, and just click on that to re-Dynamesh that object. And now I have a little better topology to kind of work with. At this stage 2, you can use any of the other brushes inside of ZBrush, so clip brushes, all sorts of tools. We're going to cover some of those a little later here. But just sculpt on it like you would normally. Since some of these objects may be thin too, you may also want to go to your brush palette over here and come down to the auto masking and make sure you have back face mask turned on. And this is going to allow you to add volume to these areas, and it's not going to take it away from the other side. So another little thing there, if you start sculpting on really fine stuff inside of ZBrush and you start losing some of that form, just turn on your back face mask, and then you're going to get a little more control over the model there. So you just continue building up these shapes to kind of establish those helmet details. Just clay brushes through here, and then if you need more resolution in certain areas, you can just redynamesh. You can up the resolution slider over here, so say something like 256, and redynamesh, and you can start getting more and more of those forms fleshed out. So that's the basic premise for using the Create Difference Mesh underneath the actual Morph Target tab there. So it just allows you to kind of just sculpt and then create models from that actual Morph Target, which is really nice and handy because it gives you a little more control and free-form nature of sculpting inside of ZBrush, and then gives you another model right out of the gate. So we'll cover more of some of this Morph Target stuff in some of the later videos as well.